Good morning. My name is Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here on staff at Centerville, and it is a joy and an honor to be sharing with you from God's Word this morning. And, this may have been, subconscious or not intentional, but I ended up in some good colors today heading into next week. Some people are getting it, Niners colors for the Super Bowl. Very excited about that, very big Niners fan. I'm also praying a lot. As Sam said last week, my prayer life has been really strong lately. So today we are continuing in our series in Mark, and we are jumping ahead in the text. So last week we preached from chapter 10, and now we are jumping ahead to chapter 11. But there is actually good reason for this, and that's because the first part of Mark, which is on the left, it says who at the top, ends in chapter 8, and the third part of Mark, it says how on the right, ends in chapter 11. And we're going to be starting that section today. And parts 1 and 3 contain almost a vast majority, all of the book's action. In parts 1 and 3, Jesus doesn't really slow down much. It's boom, Jesus heals a demoniac. Boom, Jesus walks on water. Boom, Jesus heals the 5,000. Action, story after thing that Jesus is doing. But in the middle section, chapters 8 through 10, which we're not starting today, we're saving later as the middle of the sandwich, Jesus slows down. And this is the only place in Mark where Jesus really sits with his disciples and unpacks who he is and what he is going to do at the end of the book with his crucifixion and resurrection. And he also talks a lot about what it means to follow Jesus in that time. And then it jumps into chapter 11, where we're starting today, and jumps right back into the action of Palm Sunday. So we're going through all of the main action in Jesus' life in parts 1 and 3, including the crucifixion and resurrection on Easter. And then we'll be going back to the middle and looking at those claims and predictions and teachings on what it means to follow Jesus in light of all of what we've seen throughout the book. So it's going to be good. And today we're starting part 3 with Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. But before I get started, I wanted to ask a question. And that question is, what is your favorite Disney movie? Sam, what's your favorite Disney movie? Okay, too slow. Olivia, what's your favorite Disney movie? Frozen? Okay, interesting. That's a young person answer. That's for sure. Maddie, what's your favorite Disney movie? Moana. Okay, also a young person answer. There we go. So, what was that? Encanto. Also a young person answer. There you go. Those are all new movies. Wow. Well, those are all good and acceptable answers. But none of them are the best answer because growing up, my favorite Disney movie was Aladdin. And it's still my favorite Disney movie. I heard some dissent there. I don't like that. I love the underdog, rags to riches story. I love the music. I love Robin Williams as the genie. I think that's the best character in any Disney movie. He's awesome. He does a great job. And it's all great. And one of the scenes from this movie really connects to today's passage. In the middle of the movie, Aladdin uses a genie's wish to become a prince because he thinks Jasmine is cute, which is an interesting motivation for a wish. And then he makes this grand entrance into the city. And he's riding this elephant wearing fancy clothes, and he has dancers, musicians, soldiers, servants carrying golden camels, and strangely, I just like weird little details, a giant inflatable gorilla, which this story was supposed to take place in the 1400s or so I don't get that. But at the beginning, entering the town, he has these men going in front of him, shouting, "Make way for Prince Ali." And with this grand entrance, he is making a statement that everyone can see. And that is that I am royalty, as he is now after the wish, kind of cheated, but still works. He says, I am royalty, I am rich, I am important, I am powerful, but mainly, based on his mission, I am a prince, and I am here for the princess. Because he's not the first prince in the movie to come into town to try to court Princess Jasmine. So, he has this grand entrance into the city, and today we're going to see Jesus' grand entrance into Jerusalem with much less showing off and less choreographed musical numbers, but we will still see his triumphal procession into the city as king, and we will see the statement that Jesus is making as king. So I invite you to stand for the reading of God's word, and as you'll see on the screen, I will read the parts in white, and the congregation together will read the parts in yellow. So let's read together. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples, saying to them,
Go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you doing this? Say, the Lord needs it, and will send it back here shortly.
They went and found a colt outside in the street, tied at a doorway.
As they untied it, some people standing there asked, what are you doing untying that colt?
They answered as Jesus had told them to, and the people let them go. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it.
Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut in the fields.
Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted,
Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest heaven.
Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So, if you grew up in the church, you've probably heard this passage or one of the other Palm Sunday passages that is very similar, preached many times. We're familiar with the story, and this starts Holy Week as the build-up to the crucifixion and resurrection. As the Pharisees want to arrest Jesus, end up crucifying him, the tension is building throughout the week. And today I want to focus on what we learn about Jesus through this story. And this passage is rich in small details and references and connections to other parts of Scripture that help us learn more about what Jesus is doing here and the mind of Christ and how that affects us. So there's 6 attributes of Jesus I want to highlight, and some of them kind of also pair with other attributes on the list, so it's interesting and it goes together. But the first is that Jesus is self-aware, and that is that he is aware of exactly who he is, his identity. He is aware of exactly what his mission is, and he knows that he is going to die. And we have mentioned several times in this series the theme of the messianic secret in the book of Mark. And so if you haven't been here, many times in Mark, Jesus isolates himself from the crowds when he performs miracles. And he tells people he heals, and he also tells unclean spirits that he casts out to be silent about his identity. And up to this point in Mark, Jesus is really trying to keep a low profile. And why would Jesus want to keep his identity a secret? And we kind of talked about this in previous weeks. It's largely due to the fact that the people were not ready for him due to their wrong expectations for who the Messiah would be. And Jesus had a specific plan that was in accordance with God's timing. And we see this elsewhere in the Bible, such as in John chapter 7. So here, Jesus is having a conversation with his brothers, and they want him to go public. So I'm going to breeze through this passage. That doesn't look very green, but it's supposed to be green. But you don't need to worry about reading it. I just put in green the details that we want to notice in each verse, the important details. So I'm going to breeze through these. So in verse 1, it says Jesus didn't want to go to Jerusalem because he knew they were trying to kill him. That's a pretty good reason not to go somewhere, in my opinion. But the Jewish festival of tabernacles was near. So that's a time when people would have been pilgrimaging, going as pilgrims to Jerusalem, and to join in the religious celebration, the festival. So Jerusalem would have been packed at this time. So naturally, Jesus' brothers want him to go. They want him to go to Jerusalem in Judea so that people could see the works that Jesus is doing and so that Jesus could show himself to the world, right? They want Jesus to have his coming out party. But here's how Jesus responds. My time is not here yet. It's not yet here. For you, any time will do, but my time is not yet here. So Jesus is clearly on his own schedule and his own divine timing. But interestingly, in verse 10, he still goes to the festival in Jerusalem, but not publicly, in secret. His brothers wanted him to go and do these miracles and gain all this attention, but Jesus went in secret because he knew it wasn't time for his grand entrance, which we just read in Mark 11. That's later. This is before that. So the point of this is we kind of see Jesus' strategy at this time, before Palm Sunday, that it's not yet time for Jesus to go public, but something changes. Check out this interaction that happens right before Palm Sunday in chapter 10. So this is literally the story right before Palm Sunday, and it's important. So Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem for his Palm Sunday big grand entrance, and he stops in Jericho, which is about a day's walk from Jerusalem, about 20 miles or so. And I'm going to breeze through this passage as well. It talks about how they came to Jericho. There's a large crowd there, including a blind man. And this blind man hears Jesus going by, and he shouts, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus responds to this. And also, Son of David is a unique title. We haven't really seen this in Mark yet much. But Jesus stops. He hears that call in front of the crowd, and he stops. And he addresses him. He says, "Call him, bring him to me." And he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" He's responding to that title. And the blind man, of course, says, "Rabbi, I want to see." And Jesus says, "Your faith has healed you." The blind man is healed and follows Jesus along the road. At the beginning, it said he's exiting the city towards Jerusalem. So this crowd is following him, or this individual is following him from Jericho to Jerusalem, and it's likely a crowd may have been following him as well. And it's significant that this is, again, in front of a big crowd, because often when Jesus has done miracles before, he specifically isolated himself from the crowd. There's another story with a blind man where he took him away from the crowd by the river to heal him. And it's interesting that he's typically avoided this type of public scene, but he doesn't do that at all here. So something has changed. And in the blind man calling Jesus the Son of David, that is a title that has a lot of loaded meaning. As a descendant of David, and David, of course, was Israel's king in their history, and the son of David was the promised Messiah, the heir to the throne who was going to come and take his rightful place and restore Israel. So this has a lot of loaded meaning, but Jesus doesn't silence this man as he has maybe told others to be quiet in the past. In front of the crowd, in front of everyone, he says, "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you?" And imagine you're the disciples in this situation. This is new. And they're probably watching Jesus, getting goosebumps at what's going on, because Jesus is declaring his identity publicly as the ultimate king of Israel. But they still have wrong expectations about the type of mission Jesus has, because they're likely thinking that this means, for Jesus coming to restore the kingdom of Israel, that it's time for war. Because if Jesus has come to be king, we're going to have to kill the Romans, right? And we see it in the gospel when Jesus is arrested, because Peter takes a sword as Jesus is being arrested and cuts a guy's ears off. Oh, and he's ready for battle. He's ready for this challenge. So the disciples get that something is about to happen, but they don't have this clear understanding that Jesus does. But Jesus knows who he is. He knows his mission, and he knows that the time is now. And skipping ahead a few slides, the point here is that Jesus lets the messianic secret die here on the road to Jerusalem, on the road to Palm Sunday, on the road to the cross, because now is his time, in accordance with God's plan. He enters Jerusalem as king, knowing his purpose and knowing he is going to die. So the second attribute is that Jesus is humble. While he acknowledges his identity, and he knows who he is, he embraces a humble approach to his kingship and to his identity. And Jesus takes a donkey as he goes into Jerusalem. And it was normal when a king entered a city, there would be some sort of reception or a grand entry, and townsfolk would gather, just like it did in Aladdin, right? The people gathering, "What's this going on?" And there's this big thing going on in the city, right? That's normal. But often, again, it would be about a display of power like the one Aladdin had, with wealth and soldiers and musicians and "look at me," right? But Jesus comes just on a donkey, simply and humbly. And this echoes an Old Testament prophecy about the Messiah that says, "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." And that's exactly what Jesus goes and gets in Mark, very intentionally. And a donkey is, again, a lowly animal, not fit for a king, but fit for this king, because he understands who he is, but has the humility. And we see Jesus' humility throughout his ministry, because Jesus showed that humility when he was healing the lepers, who were the lowest in society, and everyone else avoided them. And we see his humility when he washes the disciples' feet. And we see his ultimate humility when he empties himself and becomes obedient to death, even death on a cross. And Jesus' teachings, this is from the middle section of the book that I talked about that had more of the teachings about what it means to follow Jesus. Jesus says this teaching on the topic of humility, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And if Jesus came to serve, how much more should we come to serve when we go to people in this world? And as Christians, we're called to a life of humble surrender. And the greatest position in the kingdom of God is the position of a servant, to embrace a life of selfless service to others. And this is where we kind of get to the third attribute of Jesus, and that is that Jesus is paradoxical. He defies expectations. Every turn he goes, people are confused, saying, Jesus, why aren't you doing this or why aren't you doing that? And he does things that don't make sense to other people. He is a king riding in on a lowly donkey, the humble king. And newsflash, kings generally are not very humble. What's the point of being king if you can't parade around your power and wealth and show it off? So the humble king is a paradox in itself, and Jesus' life and teachings are paradoxical as well. Just jumping back to this verse, the humble king who says, if you want to be a leader, be a servant. Leaders don't serve, leaders lead. That's backwards. And if you want to become first, become a slave of all. And someone hearing that would be like, slaves first? No one puts slaves first. What is this teaching? And he says that the humble king who says, if you want to save your life, you will lose it. But if you give up, if you surrender your life, then you'll save it. And sometimes I think we take for granted and glaze over how controversial Jesus' teachings are, because they really are. They shook up the world at his time. And I think sometimes we look at them with our perspective and knowing what Jesus is going to say, and we forget how challenging and radical this is. He's the humble king who says, blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. But at that time, they thought if you're poor or suffering, that means God's punishing you for sin. And the poor people obviously don't have a kingdom of any kind. And he's the humble king who says, woe to the rich, for you have already received comfort. But hang on, theology at the time, I thought wealth was supposed to be a sign of God's blessing. People are confused when they hear Jesus' teaching, his paradoxical way of speaking. And he's the humble king who says, love those who hate you, love your enemy. Jesus is the paradoxical, humble king riding in on a donkey, the king that brings life through death. And he comes to turn his world upside down. So the fourth attribute we see in this passage is that Jesus is expected, which isn't really about him, not directly, but it's really about the crowd. Because the crowds expect Jesus. They expect a Messiah and certain things from the Messiah. And we see the kingly expectations of the crowd hidden in the passage, referencing the Old Testament. Because it says here the crowd placed their cloaks on the road, and they spread branches they had cut in the field on the road in front of Jesus riding on the donkey. And why would Jesus care if his donkey was stepping on dirt or stepping on cloaks? Right? It seems kind of unnecessary or random. It seems like, if anything, it's a tripping hazard. That's really what it seems like to me. But in doing this, again, they're making a statement about who Jesus is. We see something similar here in the Old Testament in 2 Kings 9. The context for this verse Right now, Ahab is king over Israel with his wife Jezebel. They're incredibly wicked. They're doing human sacrifice. They're doing all sorts of terrible things. So God, through the prophet Elijah, chooses someone new, and Jehu is anointed as king. And right after he's anointed, this happens. It says that they quickly took their cloaks and spread them under him on the bare steps. And he walked over them. They blew their trumpet and shouted, "Jehu is king." Just like the crowd with Jesus, they put their cloaks on the path for the king. But, interestingly, the next 2 chapters after this story is Jehu going to Ahab and Jezebel, the wicked king and queen, and killing them, and killing their wicked family members, and killing the priests of Baal, and there's immediately a lot of violence that goes on right after this, and they lay their cloaks before him, and he immediately goes and kills all the bad guys. So as they're laying their cloaks before Jesus, they're wondering, what's his next move? And I think we can assume what they're kind of thinking. They're expecting him to go full King Jehu on the wicked Romans and to wipe them all out. And the disciples expect that too. They're ready for battle. And Jesus did not meet their expectations at all. And then the city turns on him and tells Pilate to kill him a few days later when they shout, "Crucify him, crucify him." So Jesus rode into town, and people wanted to mold Jesus to their expectations rather than allowing Jesus to mold them. And we should all ask ourselves that question in how we pray and how we live. Are we trying to mold Jesus or to influence God, or are we submitting ourselves and allowing Jesus to mold us? The 5th attribute is that Jesus is strategic because he is the divine orchestrator of his plan. Now, when you think of Jesus, it's probably not a word you think of very often, strategic, right? But Jesus has every step of this planned out. He stops what he's doing and he sends his disciples to get the donkey, to get the colt of the donkey, because he knows that will fulfill Old Testament prophecy. He's very intentional with his actions. And there's another detail that shows he's strategic. And it's something I think that's often kind of misunderstood and misrepresented in Palm Sunday. People read this passage and think, oh, this procession with people shouting Hosanna, that's all going on as Jesus is entering into Jerusalem on the Jerusalem streets. And that's actually kind of wrong, or at least misleading, because that's not what primarily was happening. What was happening is this was Jesus' journey towards Jerusalem. So if you check out this map, you can see that Bethany and Bethpage are about there. So there's no scale on that map, but they are about 2 miles away across the Kidron Valley from Jerusalem. That's about a 40-minute walk. So Jesus, in this passage, is slowly walking to the city for half hour, an hour, however long, and the crowds are following him on the road to the city, laying branches and cloaks in front of him. And as you can see on the map, the green line is his path, and he's going straight towards the temple. He is entering the gate that enters into the temple. And most of his religious enemies, or many of them, would have been at the temple. And in verse 1, we kind of see some details. In verse 1, it talks about how as they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethpage and Bethany, this is where Jesus stops. So the Palm Sunday procession starts here at the Mount of Olives, 2 miles away, and then after all of that happens, in verse 11, Jesus enters Jerusalem. So again, this is all happening primarily on the road to Jerusalem, and there's a photo of it here. And it says that's the path. If you are standing on the Temple Mount and looking out towards the Mount of Olives, that's the path Jesus would be coming on. So if you're one of the priests at the temple, you may have literally been looking out at the valley and watching this parade happen for 30 or 40 minutes as Jesus is approaching. The point is, Jesus was trying very actively to draw attention to himself. He wanted to make a huge scene. He wanted to cause a commotion. He's doing kind of what Aladdin did, getting attention as he comes into town. And he is making a statement in doing so. When they're shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Son of David, he's making a kingly claim there while he's making this huge commotion. And he is making a statement. He is saying, I am royalty, I am king, and I am here for my victory. And people think that means victory over the Romans, but Jesus knows that means victory over death itself. But what Jesus is doing here is he is forcing the hand of his enemy by causing this commotion, by causing this conflict, and he brings that conflict to Jerusalem and says, now is the time. Jesus is strategic in accomplishing his mission, which takes us to our last point. Jesus is confrontational. He invites this conflict. Now, of course, the Romans ruled Jerusalem, and if you come into someone else's town saying, hey, I'm the true king, generally, one of two things happens. You either become king, probably through violently overthrowing the previous regime, or you're killed by that regime. So Jesus knows, entering Jerusalem, he is saying to the powers that be, to Rome, to the high priests, crown me or kill me. That's what's going to happen, one of those two things. There's no middle ground. But Jesus knows what's going to happen and that the cross is on the horizon. So, and the thing about that is that in the same way as Jesus comes in Jerusalem and says, crown me or kill me, at some point in our lives, in the lives of every single one of us as humans, Jesus comes to us with that same question. Crown me or kill me in your own heart, in your own lives. Jesus comes to us and says, it's up to you. Because Jesus did not come to be liked. There are only two intellectually consistent responses to Jesus' teachings in the Bible. He's either right about who he claimed to be, or he's a crazy man who thought he was God and he was super wrong. There's a passage in Revelation where Jesus says to a church, I know your deeds. You are lukewarm. You are neither hot nor cold. And you might think, well, hey, lukewarm is better than cold, right? Wrong. It says, I wish you were one or the other. And he says, because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. And this is to a church. This is to people who call themselves Christians. And I think what that says is there's no such thing as kind of following Jesus. There's no such thing as, I kind of like Jesus. I'm kind of following Jesus. Yeah, I like the idea of who Jesus is. Because Jesus' claims in Scripture are confrontational. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, not a way or a truth or a life. And his kingship claims forces you, when you read the text and grapple with it, to make a choice. Enthrone him, make him king of your life, or reject him and despise him. And that's up to every individual. There's a pastor named Tim Keller who passed away recently. He was an incredibly gifted teacher who said some very profound things. And he describes the gospel in a nutshell as this: sin is servants putting themselves in the place of the king. Adam and Eve were told by God not to eat the fruit, and then the serpent slithered in and whispered a very powerful temptation. Eat this fruit, and you will be like God. You don't have to trust him. Trust yourself. And we all face this battle every day in our own spiritual walks. Will I trust myself and whatever feels best to me, or will I trust what I know that God has told me? Will I give in to my human fleshly desires and seek revenge on my enemies and act in impulse and anger? Or will I die to self and love my enemy and turn the other cheek? Will I make myself king, or will I let Jesus be king? Sin is servants acting in the place of the king, and that started in the Garden of Eden. But salvation is the king putting himself in the place of the servant. Jesus took our punishment for our sin on the cross, reversing the effects of our rebellion against him as his ultimate act of love and sacrifice. And God came to earth despised and rejected by people, and they killed him. And yet he still chose to die on the cross for them, and while doing so said, "Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they do." That's the type of unconditional love that God has for us as his people. If you want to know this is a little bit of a weird example, but if you want to know a taste of what God's love looks like, think of the person in your life who has hurt you the most, who has betrayed you the most, someone who's done maybe some hurtful or messed up things, and then jump in front of them and take a bullet for them. Jesus did this to create a path towards reconciliation, and that path is presented to everyone. Everyone gets a choice because Jesus is ahead of you, and he is carrying his cross down that path, and he says, "Follow me." And that isn't a lukewarm invitation. He does not say, if you kind of like me, you're cool with the idea of loving your neighbors, and you try to be a good person, then you can follow me. He says, anyone who wants to follow me must start by dying to yourself, by picking up your cross daily, and by following him. Because if you want to save your life, you will lose it. But if you choose to lose your life, to surrender yourself to the King, then you will find life. And Jesus invites us to the fellowship of his sufferings, because we know that as Christians, we will suffer like he did, because he said we will have trouble in this world. But he says, "Take heart, I have overcome the world." Let's pray. Dear God, I just pray that you search our hearts for any offensive way within us, anywhere where we are straying from your will. And help us to identify that, and help us through the power of your Holy Spirit to submit that to you, to your kingship, to your rule over our lives, where we put you at the center of everything that we do, God. Help us to be a people who, while recognizing we're not perfect, we're sinners, we're going to make mistakes, but that we live hungry for you, and we live aware of how you've commanded us to live, and we desire the things of your kingdom, not the things of this earth, God. So as we enter into communion, may you remember that ultimate act of love that you showed and what that means for us. And if such a powerful example and sacrifice of love was given to us, let us be able to give you some of that love back. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.